a gilded chandelier cascaded thousands of crystal lights, illuminating the city's most opulent banquet hall. Tonight marked the annual Global Charity Gala, where the city's top business elites, wealthy families, dynasties, and fashion magnates gathered, their scents mingling with clinking glasses, every inch of air saturated with the luxury and subtle games of high society. I walked into the venue on Ethan's arm, clad in a minimalist black haute couture gown with sharp tailoring that accentuated my poised and aloof figure. Without excessive jewelry, I adorned only a pair of diamond stud earrings, understated yet enough to overshadow every deliberately ostentatious outfit in the room. Ethan, CEO of Starway Technologies, helmed a tech enterprise valued at tens of billions, making him the most prominent young entrepreneur in the business circle over the past 2 years. Few outside knew that I was not a mere socialite clinging to his wealth but the largest individual strategic investor in his company. 3 years ago, I injected $300 million of my own capital into Starway Technologies during its startup phase, followed by successive investments totaling $500 million, securing nearly 30% of the company's core equity. Apart from Ethan, I held the most influential voice as a natural shareholder. The outside world labeled me only as Mrs. Ethan, defining me as a stable, family-oriented wife of a tycoon, oblivious to the capital scale and business strategy behind me. Cameras instantly focused on us, with soft clicks of shutters rising around as fashion media and financial journalists captured the evening's headlining guests. Countless eyes landed on my intertwined arm with Ethan, carrying envy, curiosity, and polite flattery. I kept my spine straight, my steps composed, and my lips maintained a perfectly measured faint smile. I turned sideways to cooperate with the cameras for posed shots, every gesture proper and flawless. After entering and taking our seats, Ethan released my arm and turned to chat with several investment banking heavyweights beside him. He spoke gracefully, exuding charisma, adeptly navigating the social chessboard of high society, every move reflecting the steadiness and ambition of a listed company president. I sat quietly on the side, holding a glass of room-temperature champagne, my gaze sweeping casually over the bustling crowd, appearing relaxed yet observing every subtle shift in the room. 3 minutes later, a figure in a pure white fitted gown weaved through the crowd and landed precisely beside Ethan. It was Luna, his personal chief secretary. She hadn't taken her seat with the executive team but deliberately dressed to stand out, her makeup exquisite and vibrant, her wavy hair draped over her shoulders, her gown softening her figure into a gentle allure, yet her eyes held undisguised ambition to climb. Luna raised her hand to smooth a stray hair from her temple, leaning slightly toward Ethan's ear to whisper something, her shoulder nearly pressing against his arm. The physical proximity was overtly intimate, far exceeding professional boundaries. Many eyes subtly glanced at the pair, with several socialites at nearby tables pausing their conversations, exchanging knowing looks filled with amusement and anticipation of drama. I remained seated, my gaze neither deliberately averting nor fixating, but naturally resting on the charity exhibits on the stage, my demeanor relaxed and calm. I didn't look up to question, didn't turn away, didn't show the slightest hint of displeasure, maintaining an impeccably composed facade as if the overly intimate pair beside me had nothing to do with me. Luna's report lasted nearly a minute, and Ethan didn't step back from her proximity, didn't make any gesture to avoid suspicion, even tilting his head slightly to match her angle, his fingertips lightly tapping the table, his demeanor relaxed and indulgent. When she finished, he nodded slightly and gently patted her forearm, a tender and familiar gesture that he had never used with me, even during our outward displays of marital affection. When Luna straightened up, her gaze deliberately swept past me. A faint, provocative smirk curled at the corner of her lips, her eyes clear yet carrying an unmistakable air of staking her claim. Rather than restraining herself, she straightened her back and positioned herself firmly beside Ethan, securing her place with the demeanor of a hostess. A well-acquainted society matron from a neighboring table, wine glass in hand, leaned in and lowered her voice, her tone laced with implicit counsel and sympathy. "Iris, aren't you going to rein Ethan in? Tonight's scene is a bit too blatant, don't you think?" I gently swirled the champagne flute in my hand, watching the fine bubbles rise and burst against the glass. My expression remained unruffled. I offered no defense, no complaint, nor a hint of grievance or embarrassment. My response was calm and steady. It's just work communication. There's no need to read too much into it. With that understated reply, I effectively put an end to the private probing and advice. The matron, seeing my composure, merely sighed and said no more, turning back to the social chatter around us. The curious, almost watchful glances directed at me gradually tempered their restlessness. Yet there were still those silently speculating, was I too cowardly to react, or simply biding my time to avoid making a scene? What no one knew, as all eyes were fixed on the flirtatious interplay between Ethan and Luna, waiting for me to lose face or break down, was that my fingertips were quietly tapping the hidden touchscreen of my personal watch, concealed beneath the folds of my skirt. This custom watch housed an exclusive encrypted back-end, a private operating system I had built for my investment assets, completely independent of any public network, utterly secure and untraceable. The faint glow of the screen, hidden under the dim lighting and the shadow of my skirt, displayed a stream of data, the latest cash flow reports from Stellar Tech, project risk control metrics, and equity pledge details. I calmly scanned each set of data, clearly verifying the full flow of funds tied to the $500 million strategic investment, project progress, and risk mitigation clauses. From the core tech initiatives funded by the capital injection to the daily operations of liquidity and the company's short-term debt gaps, I quickly reviewed every figure, completing a comprehensive risk control analysis in my mind. At that moment, while Stellar Tech appeared to have a stable market cap and promising prospects, it had, in fact, been quietly engaging in hidden fund transfers and phantom transactions over the past 3 months. Ethan was discreetly diverting the core investment capital I had injected to cover the company's private trading losses, even funneling resources to a shell company under Luna's name. Every transaction teetered on the edge of compliance, concealing a massive financial gap. I methodically flagged each anomalous transaction and violation, encrypting and storing the evidence. Throughout it all, my expression never wavered. My posture remained unchanged. I was still the poised, gentle Mrs. Ethan, detached from worldly conflicts. Amid the evening's spectacle of power, gossip, and ambition, while others groveled before the influential, pried into scandals, or reveled in schadenfreude, I alone quietly held the reins of control. Luna remained by Ethan's side, leaning in to murmur and laugh softly, her demeanor growing bolder. Ethan accepted her closeness without hesitation, occasionally replying in a low voice, his gaze tender. He seemed to have completely forgotten the lawful wife seated not far away, forgotten that I was the investor who had propped up half of his corporate empire. The charity auction segment of the main banquet officially began, with all the spotlights focused on the center of the stage. The attention of the entire audience was captivated by the high-priced auction items, and the atmosphere inside was lively and noisy. Taking advantage of everyone being preoccupied with the side areas, Ethan raised his hand and gently patted Luna's waist, whispered a brief instruction, then turned and walked toward me. He sat down beside me, his expression natural, as if the overly intimate interaction with Luna had never happened. He turned to look at me, his tone carrying the usual placating and dismissive air. That was just a quick work handover. There are many partners tonight, and it's inevitable to communicate details on the spot. Don't overthink it. I looked up at him, my expression calm, neither angry nor sad. I didn't question him or refute him, just quietly watched his carefully constructed facade. I remained silent throughout, merely nodding slightly, going along with his public script. Ethan seemed to assume that I had been easily pacified. A glimmer of certainty flashed in his eyes before he stood up again and walked back to Luna's side, standing shoulder to shoulder with her at the edge of the crowd, his posture open and without any attempt to hide. 20 minutes later, the intermission cue sounded, and the auction segment came to a temporary close. The guests rose one after another and moved to the open terrace for fresh air and conversation. The evening breeze, tinged with the chill of the night, blew away the thick scent of champagne indoors, making the vague undercurrents of intimacy and tension within the venue more glaring and unmistakable. Holding a fresh glass of water, I walked slowly out of the banquet hall, stood by the terrace railing, and gazed at the dazzling city nightscape below. Light footsteps sounded behind me, the distinct, deliberate clatter of high heels on the stone floor. Without turning around, I knew it was Luna. She stopped half a step away from me, holding a glass of deep red wine, her posture coquettish, but her tone carried undisguised provocation. She deliberately lowered her voice so that only I could hear. "Mrs. Ethan, you know very well in your heart that Ethan has never loved you. 3 years of marriage, guarding an empty title, aren't you tired?" I kept my gaze forward, looking at the distant lights, my posture unchanged, my expression unwavering. I didn't turn to look at her or respond. Silence was not surrender, it was simply not wanting to waste words on a cheap, clumsy provocation. Seeing no response from me, Luna grew bolder. She leaned in slightly, a triumphant smile on her lips. "He brought me here tonight dressed to the nines as his final hint to you. So what if you hold the shares? So what if you have money? The place by his side has always belonged to me." Just then, Ethan's figure appeared at the terrace entrance. Luna instantly retracted her sharpness, immediately turned to look at him, the provocation in her eyes fading entirely, replaced by a warm, soft smile. She quickly turned and stepped forward, actively reaching out to take his arm, her demeanor docile and obedient. A few nearby guests happened to catch this scene, and their expressions instantly turned subtle. They whispered among themselves, their murmurs fragmented but clearly audible. Everyone was waiting to see me make a fool of myself, watching the rightful wife being publicly claimed by the other woman, yet staying silent the whole time. Some murmured in pity about my forbearance and weakness. Others speculated that I depended on Ethan to get by and dared not show any temper. Faced with all the subtle glances and gossip, I remained standing, composed and calm, revealing no trace of embarrassment. Luna leaned against Ethan, tilting her head up to act coy, her tone carrying deliberate grievance, her volume just enough for those nearby to hear. "Ethan, I was just trying to say hello to Sister Iris, but it seems she doesn't really like me." As she said this, Ethan raised his hand to gently stroke her hair, his gesture gentle and doting, his gaze holding a warmth he had never given me. He spoke lightly, his tone carrying obvious favoritism and protection. "Don't mind her. She's always been cold and doesn't understand social graces." In a single sentence, he casually shifted all the blame onto me, glossing over his marital transgressions and the secretary's blatant provocations. In public, he indulged Luna's insolence, tacitly allowed her to erode my identity and dignity, and utterly tore apart the last facade of our marriage. A close male acquaintance nearby couldn't stand by any longer. Stepping forward, he quietly reminded Ethan, "Watch your limits. There are many media outlets here tonight. If this gets out, it will affect both the company and your reputation." Ethan, however, was unconcerned. A cool, dismissive smile curled at his lips as he spoke with unwavering arrogance. "My marriage to Iris is nothing more than a business arrangement, devoid of love. A bit of outside gossip won't matter. It won't shake the company's foundation." This blunt confession shattered the false shell of our 3-year marriage once and for all. The crowd fell silent, exchanging uneasy glances. No one stepped forward to intervene again. Everyone knew this seemingly glamorous union of two powerful families had long been a hollow shell. They just never expected Ethan would be so reckless as to trample on his wife's dignity so openly. Standing in the evening breeze, I listened quietly to every word, still saying nothing. My fingers hung naturally at my sides, lightly tapping the touch panel on my wristwatch. I quickly pulled up the encrypted chat with my dedicated team and silently sent the first command. Activate Starway Technologies Fund Risk Control Protocol. Freeze all temporary fund flows. Lock the available floating capital. And suspend all undisclosed fund transfer permissions. The moment the command was sent, the specialized risk control team in their private downtown office immediately initiated the workflow. tightening control over Starway Technologies' financial channels layer by layer. All flexible working capital in the books was instantly locked down, and every irregular funding channel was severed entirely. The brief interlude on the terrace came to an end as the guests gradually made their way back to the main banquet hall. The lights refocused on the stage as the host stepped up with the microphone, announcing the commencement of the annual Corporate Leadership Awards. This was the highlight of the evening's banquet, drawing live coverage from every financial media outlet across the city. Countless cameras focused on the stage, as well as on the crowd of renowned entrepreneurs below. As the recipient of the Emerging Leader of the Year award, Ethan was a heavyweight winner of the evening. When the host called out his name, thunderous applause filled the room. He raised his hand and gave Luna, who stood beside him, a brief hug, an action that was natural and unapologetic, utterly indifferent to the startled gazes around him, before striding directly toward the steps of the stage. I slowly walked back to my original seat and sat down gracefully, my back straight and expression calm, as was my custom at every public event, prepared to participate in the stage ceremony and accept the congratulations of everyone present. Everyone assumed, as they had countless times before, that I, as Ethan's wife, would calmly welcome my husband's glory. The spotlight fell entirely on Ethan. His black handmade suit accentuated his upright posture and commanding presence. He accepted the trophy, turned his side to the camera to deliver his thank you speech, his tone steady and refined, perfectly maintaining the public image of a business elite. The applause from the audience continued, the flashes of cameras relentless, capturing his most radiant moment. Just as everyone thought the speech was about to end and the segment was about to draw to a close, Ethan suddenly raised his hand, signaling the host not to leave the stage. Holding the microphone, he swept his gaze across the guests in the room, finally fixing it on Luna, who stood in the front row below. The next moment, microphone in hand, he stepped down the stage steps one by one, crossed the central aisle, and strode directly toward Luna, who stood before the crowd. The applause abruptly ceased, the noise instantly faded, and the grand banquet hall fell into a startlingly profound silence. Everyone's eyes locked on the two of them, none knowing what he was about to do. Luna looked up at him, her eyes filled with surprise and excitement. She leaned slightly forward, actively meeting his steps, under the gaze of hundreds of dignitaries and celebrities in attendance, as well as the real-time lenses of dozens of live-streaming media outlets. Ethan reached out, cupped the back of her neck, leaned down, and firmly planted a kiss on her lips. The kiss was direct, passionate, and shameless, with no trace of restraint. It completely tore apart all pretense and disguise. The live cameras captured every single detail precisely, transmitting it in real time to the global audience streaming online. Viewers instantly erupted in uproar, bullet comments flooded the screen, and the tone of the entire banquet was completely upended. A few seconds later, Ethan straightened up, raised his hand, and took Luna's hand, their fingers interlocking. Together, they walked back to the center of the stage. They stood side by side, bathed in the spotlight under the watchful eyes of everyone, their demeanor composed and guiltless. He picked up the microphone again, his voice clear as it rang through the speakers throughout the hall, landing in everyone's ears, resolute and decisive. I thank you all for being here tonight. Here, I would like to formally announce something. My marriage with Iris was nothing more than a loveless business partnership, a mere formality, long since a hollow shell. The moment these words landed, the entire venue erupted. Guests were utterly stunned, exchanging whispers, the order of the event descending into instant chaos. Countless eyes turned instantly toward me. Seated at my table, everyone was waiting, anticipating my collapse, my loss of composure, my tears, waiting to see me publicly humiliated, reduced to the laughingstock of the city. But I remained seated, my eyes not lifting, my expression unchanged. There was no trace of grievance, anger, or embarrassment on my face. Quietly, I listened to every word spoken from the stage. My posture was upright, my demeanor cold, my silence approaching indifference. Ignoring the commotion throughout the room, Ethan continued, his tone infused with deliberate ostentation and proclamation. For 3 years, the one who walked through the lows with me, stayed by me, and supported me was never Iris. The woman standing beside me, Luna, is the one I love deeply, who has stood by me, and is the wife I truly recognize. From now on, all my status, glory, and future are bound to her. The earth-shattering announcement was resolute and clear. He, facing a live broadcast and the entire city's elite, completely overturned our 3-year marriage, publicly stripped me of my position, and pinned me to the status of a laughingstock. Luna stood by his side, her eyes reddened, feigning emotion, but her eyes were full of triumphant pride. She slightly raised her head to accept the attention of the crowd, firmly securing her place. On stage, the two gazed at each other affectionately, their gestures intimate, like a pair of deeply devoted lovers. The expressions of the crowd below varied: sympathy, mockery, curiosity, shock, all mixed together, but I remained utterly calm. I lifted my eyes and looked lightly toward the center of the stage, my gaze not focusing on anyone, simply staring ahead. At the moment when everyone assumed I was stunned into helplessness and unable to resist the sudden upheaval, my right hand quietly slipped into the pocket of my skirt, pulling out a slim personal phone. The screen lit up, bypassing any extra interface, directly opening a dedicated encrypted investment channel. My fingers swiftly tapped on the screen, avoiding all cameras and eyes, typing word by word the ultimate command: immediately initiate a full withdrawal plan, unconditionally recall my personal strategic investment of $500 million in StarTech, terminate all cooperation agreements, liquidate all equity, execute immediately, irreversible and non-pause. The command was sent successfully, and a confirmation receipt for the encryption popped up. I put the phone away, placed it back into my pocket, sat upright again, and remained silent. The farce on stage continued to escalate. Ethan held the microphone, addressing the live-streaming audience, continuously embellishing his so-called fearless true love with Luna while deliberately downplaying his infidelity and betrayal during his marriage. He packaged their 3-year arranged marriage as an unavoidable compromise, portraying himself as a brave soul breaking free from constraints to pursue true love. Luna leaned against him, lowering her head to shed tears at just the right moments, her fragile and innocent demeanor fooling most of the unsuspecting viewers. The live stream comments were polarized. Some mocked Ethan as heartless and ungrateful, while others were deceived by this high-profile declaration of love, sending their blessings. The entire banquet had turned into their exclusive official announcement. The business tycoons, investment partners, and industry veterans present all remained silent, their expressions grave. Those who had spent years in the business world understood that Ethan's current standing was not achieved solely by his own efforts. My continuous $500 million investment and the backing of my network and resources were the core foundation of Starway Technologies' steady expansion. Onlookers appeared to be watching the spectacle, but in truth, they were all quietly observing my reaction, waiting for my countermove and statement. Yet, from beginning to end, I remained seated, unmoved, silent, as calm as an outsider. When the stage segment ended, Ethan and Luna walked down hand in hand, accepting the gazes around them without a trace of guilt or evasion. He even deliberately circled over to my seat, casting a condescending glance at me, his eyes carrying a subtle provocation and certainty, convinced that I was helpless and could only passively accept this change of status. I did not look up to meet his gaze. I stayed seated, my fingers quietly lighting up my phone under the table. The full withdrawal order I had just issued was already in full execution. My dedicated capital team was always on standby, far more efficient than ordinary financial institutions. Compliance procedures, liquidation processes, and fund transfers were all pre-planned, requiring no additional approvals, just one click to execute. On the screen, execution confirmations popped up rapidly. The first $200 million core project investment had been completely liquidated, with the corresponding project equity fully returned to my name, entirely severed from Starway Technology. Immediately afterward, The remaining $300 million in liquidity funds and strategic reserves initiated the withdrawal process, bypassing all the company's regular financial channels and flowing directly back to my overseas encrypted accounts. Simultaneously, I issued the second chain command, completely cutting off all additional benefits. I terminated all industry endorsements, government enterprise cooperation resources, and risk coverage guarantees I had provided to Starway Technology. I revoked all channel privileges, project qualification rights, and industry fast tracks that came with my exclusive investment. This $500 million was never simple cash investment, it was the lifeblood of Starway Technology's expansion over the past 3 years. Half of the company's tech projects, offline implementation engineering, and overseas business development all relied on this funding. Not only did I withdraw the capital, but I also stripped away all the invisible resources tied to this investment, directly cutting off the company's development lifeline. As the banquet neared its end, guests gradually left. Many passed by my seat, whispering words of comfort, their voices full of sympathy, all believing I had lost face and suffered a great injustice tonight. Several familiar investors paused, signaling that if I needed help, they were willing to step in and apply pressure on Ethan. I simply shook my head gently, politely thanked them, and still said nothing further. Everyone thought I was enduring and retreating, unaware that I had already delivered my fatal counterstrike. The aftermath of this storm would soon sweep through Starway Technology entirely. Ethan left with Luna for socializing, full of smugness and relaxation, completely oblivious to any anomalies. Tonight, he had won his high-profile love declaration, believing he had finally broken free from a loveless marriage. His heart was filled with the illusion of a perfect future with Luna, controlling both the company and his life. Luna nestled in his arms, beaming with smiles, constantly planning their future life and work, dreaming of taking over all the resources and completely replacing my position. At 11 o'clock deep into the night, the banquet finally ended. I returned to my private villa alone by car. The vehicle drove smoothly through the darkness, and on my phone, back-end notifications kept popping up, confirming the completion of the liquidation. $500 million had been fully returned. All equity transfers were finalized. All cooperation agreements were officially terminated. And every step of the process was legal and compliant, with no loopholes to exploit. At the same time, the financial center at the headquarters of Xingtu Technology was brightly lit. When the night shift financial officer routinely checked the account balance, they suddenly discovered a massive funding gap in the company's core accounts. Hundreds of millions in liquidity had vanished without a trace, and the book data showed widespread red error warnings. The officer on duty immediately panicked, urgently pulling up transaction records and repeatedly checking the transfer ports, but could only find a record of an anonymous large-scale withdrawal and liquidation. There was no way to trace the specific entity or intercept the return of funds. The system's back-end successively triggered risk alerts, funding interruption alerts, and project suspension alerts, with red warnings flooding the entire interface. Within just half an hour, the company's emergency risk control mechanisms were fully activated. All funding ports for ongoing projects were automatically locked, all pending payment contracts were suspended, and all external cooperation channels were temporarily frozen. The entire company's capital chain had completely severed late at night. The financial director was urgently called back to the office, and the entire team worked through the night to trace the source of the crisis, escalating the abnormal situation level by level. But no one could figure it out. They couldn't find the reason for the fund loss or trace the responsible party. They could only watch helplessly as the company's accounts drained completely, plunging into a state of total paralysis. In the early hours of the morning, Starway Technology was in complete chaos. The financial director led the team in an all-night review of the system's cash flow, reconciling account deficits, and repeatedly cross-referencing the investment ledgers and fund transfer records of the past 3 years. Yet they were still unable to pinpoint the specific source of the massive fund outflow. The encrypted withdrawal channel was completely hidden, with no traceable authenticated operational records, leaving only cold system liquidation prompts. All core ongoing projects simultaneously triggered work stoppage warnings. 3 key R&D projects were frozen due to fund shortages, preventing the payment of raw material procurement, technical staff salaries, and equipment maintenance fees. Cooperative suppliers sent default warning notices overnight, explicitly stating that overdue payments would directly terminate cooperation and hold Starway Technology liable for breach of contract. By dawn, pre-market trading in the U.S. stock market began, and Starway Technology's opening decline directly broke through 12 percentage points. Bearish news silently spread through investment banking circles. Market panic quickly escalated, and retail and small institutional investors placed sell orders one after another, causing the company's market value to evaporate by billions in just a few hours. Ethan, still hungover, was awoken at 9 a.m. by a barrage of urgent calls. He had celebrated with Luna until late the night before at a private club, immersed in the joy of a high-profile public announcement and breaking free from marital constraints, completely missing dozens of urgent calls and crisis reports from the company with his phone on silent. Seeing the screen full of missed calls and messages from executives, Ethan frowned with impatience, dismissing them as routine work matters. He casually opened the messages. When he saw a series of keywords, funding gap, project suspension, stock price crash, his smile instantly faded, and his expression turned cold and grim. He immediately drove to the company, his face dark the entire way, unable to comprehend why a fatal crisis had befallen the company overnight. In his view, Starway Technology had ample capital reserves, stable project operations, and a good industry reputation, with no cause for a collapse. Upon arriving at the top-floor executive meeting room, all senior executives were present, the atmosphere tense and heavy. The financial director immediately projected the account data, displaying the massive funding gap, anonymous liquidation records, and all frozen fund channels, anxiously reporting the situation. After repeated investigations, the team still could not identify the entity behind the withdrawal, only concluding it was a top-tier encrypted capital operation. Everyone speculated that it was malicious short selling by industry competitors, a deliberate attack by overseas capital, or a capital flight caused by systemic market risk. None of them associated the crisis with me. After all, I had always held my shares quietly, never publicly intervened in the company's operations, and shown no signs of making a move. Ethan frowned deeply, dismissing each speculation, insisting that competitors lacked the precision to manipulate such a move and that overseas capital would not target a medium-sized tech company to precisely intercept core funds. The entire meeting involved repeated scenario analyses and layered checks, yet the root of the crisis remained elusive, leaving everyone bewildered and at a deadlock. Just as the management was in disarray and urgently discussing temporary financing remedies, Luna, as the chief secretary, barged directly into the high-level meeting. Breaking from her usual role of handling only administrative liaison, she held a project adjustment plan and proactively intervened in core business decisions. Taking advantage of Ethan's turmoil and inability to oversee the overall situation, she publicly proposed scaling back R&D investment and selling off some marginal projects for cash, while volunteering to take over client relations and resource coordination, using the opportunity to place her own contacts into key business departments. Many executives were already displeased with her high-profile public announcement the night before and her overstepping of boundaries. Seeing her now arbitrarily meddle in top-level decisions, they voiced their opposition, arguing that a secretary had no right to interfere in the company's strategic direction. But a distracted Ethan, unwilling to delve into details, treated it as a desperate remedy and tacitly approved all her actions. This indulgence only intensified the internal turmoil. Luna held temporary authority, freely reassigning personnel and reallocating project resources across departments. Lacking understanding of core operations, she gave chaotic orders, causing multiple projects that were barely surviving to grind to a complete halt and throwing internal processes into total disarray. Externally, The stock price kept plummeting and partners pursued accountability relentlessly. Internally, there was personnel turmoil and chaotic decision-making. Xingtong Technology was thoroughly caught in a dual crisis both inside and out. Ethan, stationed in the conference room, issued one remedial directive after another, but all were stopgap measures that failed to address the root cause, utterly unable to stabilize the collapsing situation. The high-level meeting remained deadlocked for a full 2 hours, with every contingency plan failing. Temporary financing channels were blocked as soon as they were established, and potential investors withdrew at the last minute with polite refusals. No one was willing to take on this capital crisis of dubious origin, and Starpath Technologies' external lifelines were completely cut off. The atmosphere in the room grew suffocating. The stock price continued its real-time plunge. Red loss data refreshing the screen without pause. Default notices from partners arrived in bulk at the front desk, stacking up on the office tables, every word a demand for liability and compensation. The company's pressure had reached its breaking point. Luna was still issuing chaotic commands in the conference room, insisting the marketing department urgently release a stability-maintaining PR statement, claiming the company's operations were perfectly normal in an attempt to cover up the crisis. But the false announcement only fueled greater market skepticism, exacerbating retail investor panic selling and making the situation worse. The executives had reached their limit, openly questioning Luna's decisions one after another. The conference room erupting into endless disputes. Internal division, external collapse, dual pressures crushed what was once an orderly company operation. Ethan sat at the head of the table, pressing his fingers hard against his temples, his eyes filled with agitation and frustration, yet still unable to find a way out of the crisis. Just as everyone was on the verge of breaking down, the deputy finance director, who had gone out to retrieve the original underlying ledgers, rushed back into the conference room. His face was pale, his breath ragged, and his hands were clenched tightly around a stack of original paper filing documents. Unlike the encrypted transaction records in the system back-end, this archive contained the original investment filings, equity subscription agreements, and capital allocation statements from 3 years ago. It was the only underlying record unaffected by encryption, explicitly identifying the sole contributor of Starpath Technologies' $500 million core strategic capital, my private investment fund. The deputy finance director walked quickly to the projection screen and directly pulled up the original capital lock-in agreement and the withdrawal triggering clauses. His voice trembling, he reported in front of everyone, this fully encrypted capital withdrawal, closed-loop capital repatriation, and complete resource permission stripping operation perfectly matched the exclusive liquidation mechanism of my fund. It was the only corresponding access point. The room fell into utter silence. The executives, who had been arguing moments before, all froze. Their eyes turned in unison to Ethan, seated at the head of the table. The air was so heavy it was suffocating. All previous speculation about competitors shorting the stock, overseas attacks, and market risks was completely overturned. This overnight, unsolvable, fatal crisis was never external suppression. It came from the person he had most underestimated, most recklessly betrayed of me. The finance director, suppressing his panic, laid out the full truth. The $500 million I had invested was not just liquidity. It was the risk control buffer and credit endorsement for all the company's core projects. My withdrawal wasn't just pulling out cash, it directly revoked the majority of the company's operating licenses, project approvals, and industry partnership credentials. That was the fundamental reason why all investors and partners had collectively abandoned the company. The moment the truth came to light, Ethan went rigid. He jerked his head up, staring at the filing documents on the screen. His pupils dilated violently. The agitation and frustration in his eyes faded bit by bit, replaced by an almost incomprehensible shock. He had always thought of me as a docile wife, dependent on him, guarding the facade of marriage. He believed that even after being publicly betrayed and humiliated, I would silently endure to preserve the dignity of our relationship and my status as part of a prominent family. He was convinced I knew nothing about capital operations, that I had no power to shake his business empire, and that I would never dare to destroy years of marital strategy. But now, the cold ledger data, the compliant liquidation records, and the total collapse of the company shattered every ounce of his arrogance. At last night's banquet, I had been silent throughout, showing neither anger nor sorrow. That was not weakness or forbearance. It was me coldly watching him walk toward his own destruction. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't defend myself, because the moment he kissed Luna and publicly betrayed me, I had already pressed the button for his ultimate downfall. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. After the dead silence, the color rapidly drained from Ethan's face. His originally dark and flushed cheeks instantly turned as pale as paper, devoid of any trace of color, even his lips completely losing their hue. His fingertips began to tremble uncontrollably, his arms resting on the table stiff and tense, and his entire aura collapsed entirely. All the certainty, arrogance, and self-assurance from before were utterly transformed into piercing panic and regret. The deathly silence in the conference room lasted for several seconds, completely shattering all of Ethan's arrogance and pride. He snapped back to reality, ignoring the gaze of the executives present, abruptly stood up, grabbed his phone, and dialed my number with trembling, frantic fingers. At that moment, his only thought was to beg, apologize, and make amends, to get me to retract the withdrawal order and save the precarious StarPath technology. The cold, mechanical beeps rang repeatedly from the receiver, but the call never went through. He dialed over a dozen numbers, all automatically blocked without a single connection. Frantically, he opened the chat interface and typed out a lengthy apology, his tone dripping with humility. He rambled about last night's public announcement being a momentary impulse, promised to cut ties with Luna immediately, return to the family, and begged me to show mercy. He typed, sent, and refreshed. Every message vanished into the void with no read receipts. I had already blocked all his contact methods long ago, phone, text, social media, cutting off every channel of communication, leaving him no chance to negotiate. The executives in the room silently watched their humiliated, out-of-control president, none offering a word of comfort. Everyone had fully grasped the situation. The company's lifeline was in my hands, and Ethan's reckless betrayal the night before had destroyed the only card he had left. His current groveling was nothing but a futile act of self-comfort. Refusing to accept reality, Ethan shoved his chair aside and rushed out of the conference room, ignoring the stairs, and sped off to my private villa. He was convinced that if he bowed his head in person and sincerely apologized, I would relent and delay the liquidation out of fondness for our 3-year marriage. But when he arrived at the villa's entrance, security immediately stopped him. My private villa's access system had been updated, completely revoking his permissions. His license plate, facial recognition, and keycard were all invalidated. He couldn't even step through the community gates. He argued at the entrance, his posture humble, stripped of all the arrogance of a CEO. But the security guards adhered strictly to orders, politely but firmly refusing him entry. No one made an exception. No one relayed a message. He was left standing outside, futile and isolated. Under the scorching sun, Ethan panicked. He immediately turned around and drove to my private investment office, hoping to intercept me in the building for a face-to-face discussion. But the office's security system had also been cleared of his access. The receptionist politely stopped him, the system showing no appointment and no entry permissions, barring him outright. Following my preset instructions, the receptionist calmly informed him, Ms. Iris is not accepting any meetings or mediation. All capital operations concerning StarPath technology are compliant and irreversible, with no room for negotiation. In just half a day, Ethan scoured every place he could find me, hitting dead ends at every turn, unable to catch even a glimpse of me. The wife who had once been always available, gentle, and dignified had now severed all ties with him, leaving no room for mercy. At the same time, I had set the second phase of my counterattack in motion. All the investment circles, business connections, and industry partners tied to my name ceased any support for StarPath technology. The government-enterprise collaborations, industry channels, and brand endorsements that had relied on my resources were all revoked. The business community, seeing my stance, followed suit, cutting ties and halting all cooperation with StarPath technology. The investors, partners, and distributors who had once eagerly approached now avoided it like the plague. No one dared to lend a hand. StarPath Technologies' external survival space was completely sealed off. No capital dared to step in to rescue the market. No connections dared to offer help. It was left abandoned in the business world. The company's stock price continued to plummet. The secondary market collapsed entirely. Account funds dried up. Projects stagnated. Employees grew restless. And a wave of resignations quietly erupted. Ethan, trapped outside, repeatedly scrolled through his phone, plummeting stock prices, endless default notices, and urgent reports from executives, completely succumbing to despair. For the first time, he clearly felt the resolve of my counterattack, not some petty punishment born of a fleeting grudge, but a ruthless, thorough crushing with no quarter given. Luna called, her voice frantic, repeatedly asking for a way out, all her usual charm and arrogance gone. But Ethan, unable to even care for himself at that moment, had no strength to console her, let alone clean up the mess. So he irritably hung up the phone. Ethan hung up on Luna in frustration, his mind consumed by sheer desperation. Repeated setbacks, a collapsing stock price, and a severed capital chain had crushed every ounce of his confidence and energy. At this moment, he clung to one last fragile hope, even if he lost all financial backing. At least Luna was still by his side, the woman he had risked everything for the previous night by publicly announcing their relationship. Suppressing his anxiety, he drove back to the company, trying to rally his remaining team to barely stabilize the situation and slowly search for a slim chance to turn things around. In his mind, Luna was the one who had stayed with him through his lowest points, and she would surely stand by him in this crisis, helping him manage the internal chaos. But the moment he stepped into the executive office, he found it in disarray. The neatly organized core project files and client materials had all been rifled through. The desk drawers were wide open, and the private project keys and encrypted cooperation documents stored inside were gone. Ethan's heart sank as a wave of intense unease washed over him. He immediately called internal affairs, and the chilling response he got cut deep. Luna hadn't stayed at her post to maintain stability. Instead, taking advantage of the morning's chaos, she had used the temporary access Ethan had granted her to enter the core database, copying all of the company's top-tier client resources, unpublished R&D plans, and exclusive partnership channel documents. Not only that, she had also unauthorizedly transferred the remaining small amount of liquid funds from the company's account, emptied her personal work account and associated emergency funds, and completely drained the last bit of working capital the company had left. Just 10 minutes ago, Luna had packed up all her personal belongings, left Starlight Technology for good, gone off the grid without a single word. Ethan stood frozen, unable to believe it. The woman who had been soft and sweet in his arms the night before, vowing to stay with him forever, had now walked away without hesitation, hitting him when he was down and stripping away the last of his resources. He frantically dialed Luna's number over and over, but the line was dead. Her social media accounts had blocked him, cutting off all contact entirely. After a brief moment of shock, a bone-chilling cold swept over him. He finally faced the truth. This grand, passionate declaration of love had been nothing but a calculated, self-serving scheme from start to finish. Luna had never loved him. What she had been after all along was his identity as CEO, the resources of his billion-dollar company, and the glamorous, wealthy lifestyle. Now that Starlight Technology had fallen from its pedestal and was about to go bankrupt, stripped of all its value, she had decisively pulled away, abandoning him without a second thought. But this was only the beginning. By 2 p.m., social media platforms and financial news accounts erupted simultaneously, unleashing a flood of damaging revelations and scandals about Ethan. The content was precise and detailed. Long-term marital infidelity, abuse of corporate power, commingling of public and private funds, illegal borrowing, and a host of other violations were laid out one by one. The whistleblower was Luna herself. Not only had she fled with the stolen assets, but she had also taken the pilfered core commercial data and defected to Starlight Technologies' biggest competitor in the industry, Hongcore Innovation. To secure a high-paying position and core equity, she had no qualms about completely destroying Ethan's reputation, using his scandals and company secrets as stepping stones. Public opinion exploded, and the internet was in an uproar. The image of a devoted lover from the high-profile dinner announcement had been shattered, replaced by labels of a jerk, a fraud, and an unethical business operator. Regulatory authorities immediately stepped in, launching an investigation into the exposed violations. Banks simultaneously tightened all remaining credit lines, completely cutting off any financing lifeline Starlight Technology had left. Inside the company, it was total collapse. Mid-level executives submitted resignations one after another. The core technical team defected en masse, and large numbers of entry-level employees left, leaving the office nearly empty. The already precarious external crisis, compounded by a completely out-of-control internal turmoil, left Starway Technology trapped in an inescapable deadlock. Standing alone in the vast, cold CEO's office, Ethan watched the overwhelming flood of negative news on the screen, the plummeting stock prices, the dense pile of liability lawsuits, and completely broke down. Luna's betrayal completely shattered Xingtu Technology's last buffer of public opinion. With negative press spreading like wildfire across the internet and regulatory investigations closing in layer by layer, Ethan was left guarding an empty office, powerless to turn the tide. But this was merely the end of internal turmoil. My full-scale external capital siege had only just begun. Earlier, I had only made basic countermoves by withdrawing all investments and cutting off resource endorsements, leaving some room and refraining from driving them to the brink. I thought that even after 3 years of marriage, despite his public betrayal and humiliation, I didn't need to completely destroy his life. But Luna's backstabbing and Ethan's relentless selfishness and arrogance made me abandon all remaining mercy. Since they had no qualms about trampling on my dignity, I would uproot every foundation they stood on. From my private office, I issued top-tier capital directives, mobilizing a long-standing deep alliance of elite investors within the circle to launch a full-scale blockade against Xingtu Technology. Across the entire high-end capital ecosystem and the tech investment track, a unified risk control warning was issued simultaneously, prohibiting any institution or individual from providing Xingtu Technology with any form of financing, borrowing, credit, or resource collaboration. A few scattered small investors had considered swooping in at low prices, hoping to bet on a potential company turnaround. But once my alliance's blockade took effect, all potential investors immediately withdrew. No one dared to defy my capital will. No one was willing to risk an enterprise that had lost all value and had offended me. Xingtu Technology was completely blacklisted from the entire capital circle, severing all external funding channels. Then, I launched the second wave of precision strikes, legally reclaiming all exclusive qualifications and partnership rights tied to my $500 million investment. All the government enterprise tech innovation support projects, national-level R&D access credentials, and overseas import-export cooperation channels I had secured for Xingtu Technology were revoked permanently with a single stroke. These qualifications were the core barriers that set Xingtu Technology apart from ordinary tech companies, the foundation for securing high-end projects, policy benefits, and industry leadership. The moment they were withdrawn, all ongoing high-end projects were officially halted by authorities. All government enterprise collaborations already in place were terminated, and massive project subsidies and policy support were wiped out. Without funding channels, policy support, or high-end projects, even the remaining ordinary civilian projects ground to a halt due to capital shortages and team collapse. In just days, Xingtu Technology went from a cutting-edge tech leader valued at tens of billions to a shell company with no projects, no funding, no qualifications, and no team. To complete the counterattack in a seamless loop, I executed the final compliance kill shot, instructing my legal team to formally file for equity liquidation and a breach of contract compensation lawsuit. Over the past 3 years, Ethan had repeatedly misappropriated dedicated investment funds, diverted project money, and overextended corporate credit. Every illegal move had been documented by my team, with a complete and unassailable chain of evidence. The court quickly accepted and filed the case, simultaneously freezing all of Ethan's personal assets, equity earnings, real estate, and vehicles, prohibiting any asset transfers, ownership changes, or cash outs. All assets, equity, and cash he had secretly moved or gifted to Luna during the marriage were also included in the recovery scope, legally traced and reclaimed. With multiple blows stacking up without a moment's respite, Ethan had no room to breathe. Not only had he lost his career foundation, but his personal assets were locked down, with debts and penalties piling up day by day, crushing whatever psychological defenses he had left. He tried to plead through acquaintances in the circle, attempting to relay apologies and a willingness to compromise through intermediaries. He offered to publicly apologize, cut ties with Luna, and give up his say in the company, begging only for the siege to end and a sliver of survival to remain. But every plea, every attempt at negotiation or compromise, was intercepted by my team, never reaching my ears. In the capital market, mercy has never been the standard. Eradicating the roots and eliminating future troubles is the safest way to conclude. The moment he publicly trampled on my dignity, willfully drained my fallback resources, and disregarded the decency of our 3-year marriage, he should have borne all the corresponding consequences. In just 3 days, the stock price of Starway Technology turned into junk, its market value approaching zero, and all its commercial value was completely wiped out. Once a thriving listed company, it has now become the biggest laughingstock in business circles, with no one regretting it, no one lending a hand, leaving only a shattered, desolate mess. After a complete career collapse and the total freeze of his assets, Ethan's life had hit rock bottom. Trapped day after day in the empty, dilapidated headquarters of his company, surrounded by overwhelming accountability lawsuits, employee arbitration notices, and regulatory penalty documents, he had completely lost any leverage to turn things around. The few connections he had left gradually drifted away, and the business partners who once surrounded him drew clear boundaries. With no one willing to lend a hand, he was utterly alone, a failure without support. Amid his frantic efforts to handle business crises, scramble for funds to pay damages, and deal with various disputes, my legal team formally submitted the complete divorce lawsuit documents to the court, initiating a thorough reckoning of the marriage. Unlike ordinary divorce disputes, the chain of evidence I submitted was complete, precise, and flawless, fully legal and compliant, leaving no room for rebuttal. The materials clearly listed all of Ethan's faults over the 3 years of marriage. From his long-term extramarital affair with Luna and continuous cohabitation with a third party, to secretly transferring joint marital assets, misappropriating family funds to support the third party, and using the marriage to siphon off my private investment capital while illegally diverting project funds for personal gain, every fact was supported by complete transfer records, surveillance footage, chat logs, and witness testimonies. Among them, the key piece was the live-streamed video of his public betrayal at the banquet, where he openly announced the third party as his wife, along with media coverage, solid proof of his major marital misconduct. The accumulated evidence layers firmly established the full extent of his deliberate betrayal of the marriage and malicious infringement on my rights. The court formally accepted the case and initiated an expedited trial process, simultaneously publishing the case acceptance notice. When the news broke, Ethan, already notorious, was once again thrust into the public eye, becoming the laughingstock of the entire city. Everyone knew that not only had his career completely failed, but he also had no hope of winning the divorce case. Trapped in desperation, Ethan finally panicked. More than bankruptcy and debt, the prospect of leaving with nothing, losing everything, was unbearable to him. He tried to find time to prepare a defense but was already stretched thin. Overwhelmed by the pressures of company bankruptcy, liquidation, regulatory penalties, and multiple lawsuits, he had neither the time, funds, nor manpower to mount a defense, leaving him to passively await the trial's verdict. On the day of the trial, I was present throughout, calm and composed, sitting silently through the proceedings as my legal team handled all the processes and presented all the evidence. Ethan looked haggard and worn, thin and gaunt. With bloodshot eyes, none of the former glamour of a listed company president remained. In court, he attempted to repent and plead for mercy, rambling on about the details of our 3-year marriage, feigning attempts to reconcile. He promised to cut ties with Luna completely and reform, begging the judge to consider leniency, to preserve some assets for him, and to leave him a shred of dignity. He even looked at me from across the courtroom, trying to use the faint remnants of sentiment to soften my resolve. But the law speaks only in evidence, not sentiment. Faced with a complete chain of evidence of his faults, all his repentance and excuses were powerless. The court ultimately ruled on the spot, identifying Ethan as the party with major marital fault, established through multiple facts: malicious asset transfers, long-term extramarital affairs, and infringement on the legitimate rights of the spouse. The verdict was clear and decisive. The marriage was dissolved. Ethan was ordered to leave with nothing due to his major faults. All properties, assets, investments, and equity returns from the marriage were awarded to me, with no share left for him. Moreover, all assets he had secretly transferred or gifted to Luna were deemed by the court as malicious transfers of joint marital property and were fully recovered and returned to my name. In addition, the court ruled that Ethan would bear all costs of the divorce lawsuit and pay compensation for the infringement during the marriage, combined with the massive penalties for prior business breaches and the joint debts of the bankrupt company. He had gone from a young entrepreneur worth billions to a destitute debtor, burdened with massive debts and completely penniless. After the verdict was announced, Ethan stood frozen in the defendant's seat, his face ashen and his body utterly drained. He could no longer maintain his last shred of dignity, his figure swaying unsteadily, his eyes filled with profound regret and despair. He finally realized that his momentary arrogance and ostentation at that long-ago dinner party had cost him everything: his career, marriage, wealth, and reputation, all reduced to zero. I confirmed the judgment in court and signed off on all procedures. The final signature on the court's verdict marked the definitive end of a multi-day storm of turmoil, layers of entanglements, and the settling of love and hate. As I walked out of the courthouse, the noonday sun was clear and bright, spreading across the glass curtain walls of the entire city's CBD, reflecting crisp, clean white light. A light breeze brushed past my shoulders, without a hint of heavy shackles. The fake marriage that had bound me for 3 full years, the deliberate forbearance, the passive maneuvering, all vanished into thin air in that moment. Behind me in the courthouse lobby, Ethan remained frozen in place, unable to rise for a long time. A bailiff came over to remind him to leave as a routine matter. Only then did he barely lift his bloodshot eyes, staring blankly at the empty floor of the hall, looking utterly defeated and disheveled. In just 1 week, he had plummeted from a much-celebrated CEO of a publicly listed tech startup and the most sought-after young elite in the business circle to a penniless, heavily indebted, and disgraced defaulter. His career collapsed. His marriage was wiped out. His reputation was ruined, and his friends and allies deserted him. Every highlight and advantage in his life had been squandered by his own hands, leaving him with nothing. The day after the final judgment took effect, Starway Tech officially entered full bankruptcy liquidation proceedings. The liquidation team appointed by the court took over the company's headquarters, sealing all remaining office assets, equipment, archives, and system data. They systematically sorted out and settled the company's outstanding debts, contract disputes, and employee salary issues. The once brightly lit, fully occupied high-end office building stood empty, The formerly bustling and efficient workspaces were now covered in dust, with only the cold, mechanical sounds of the liquidation team's checks echoing through the halls. All major cooperation channels, government and corporate projects, and industry qualifications were completely cancelled and voided. Every resource barrier that had once supported his position at the top of the industry was gone without a trace. The stock market platform officially announced Starway Tech's delisting notice. The continuously plunging stock price hit zero. The regrets of countless small investors, the sighs of industry insiders, and the heated discussions of online onlookers could no longer reverse the complete collapse of this business empire. Ethan's remaining real estate, luxury cars, personal savings, and leftover equity were all legally frozen and auctioned off. The proceeds were used entirely to cover his commercial default penalties, marital infringement compensation, and unpaid employee salaries. With no way out, he had completely lost all means of survival, with none of his former refinement and dignity left. Every capital circle and network in the industry had completely blacklisted and blocked him. No company dared to hire him, and no one was willing to have any connection with him. The glory of being surrounded and celebrated had completely turned into a shunned disgrace. As for Luna, who had initially pushed the situation forward and betrayed him, she too did not escape unscathed. Thinking herself clever, she used stolen trade secrets and damaging information about Ethan to jump to a competitor for a high-ranking position, hoping to climb to the top by stepping over others and secure a high-paying executive role. But she was too arrogant, ignoring the core survival rule of capital circles. Betrayers are never accepted. At first, the competitor used the confidential material she provided to execute market strikes and seize project resources, but they quickly initiated an internal audit. The company's risk control department soon uncovered her theft of trade secrets from her former employer, malicious disclosure of industry data, and the illegal act of smearing her previous company for personal gain. They deemed her professional conduct severely unethical and a high employment risk. Within days, Luna was swiftly fired by the new company. All onboarding benefits, stock options, and salary packages were cancelled. The industry issued a professional blacklist, permanently barring her from the entire tech business circle, with no chance of re-employment. Moreover, Starway Tech's liquidation team legally filed an infringement lawsuit against her, demanding the return of all illegally diverted liquid funds and compensation for the massive economic losses caused by the leaked trade secrets. The court legally upheld all claims, ordering Luna to return the stolen money and pay a hefty penalty within a set period. Overnight, she went from a third-party scheming to climb to the top to a discredited professional burdened with massive debts, jobless, adrift, and blacklisted from the industry. The shortcut she so meticulously calculated eventually became the abyss that trapped her. Every ounce of greed and malice turned back on her, leaving her to reap what she sowed. This betrayal farce, which began at a dinner party, ultimately ended in a thorough mutual reckoning. Ethan paid the ultimate price of a collapsed life for his infidelity, arrogance, and ingratitude. Luna buried her entire career prospects for her greed, betrayal, and opportunism. Both, who joined hands to trample my dignity and drain my resources, fell without exception. As for me, I walked away unscathed from start to finish, calm, composed, and without a single scratch. I recovered the full $500 million principal of my strategic investment, executed all capital maneuvers strictly within legal bounds without incurring a single loss, and left no room for public criticism or legal loopholes. On top of that, the court ordered recovery of all maliciously transferred assets, and marital infringement compensation further offset my years of hidden losses, ensuring I suffered no damage from this rotten marriage. Seizing the window of Starway Technologies' delisting reshuffle and industry restructuring, I smoothly consolidated my personal capital and network resources, quietly deploying them into multiple emerging tech tracks, precisely bottom-fishing premium projects and core technical teams, the high-end government and corporate resources, overseas collaboration channels, and industry connections that once relied on Starway Technology. After witnessing my capital strength and decisive, no-holds-barred approach voluntarily gravitated toward me, becoming long-term stable assets under my exclusive control. I have completely shed all ineffective relationships and burdens, no longer enduring or hiding for anyone, no longer compromising for the sake of a false marital facade. Free from this draining relationship, my business empire has expanded against the grain. My personal investment portfolio has steadily grown, and my industry influence and position have become ever more solid, truly standing at my own capital peak. On a weekend evening, I stood on my private rooftop observation deck, overlooking the city's sea of lights and bustling neon. The gentle evening breeze soothed away all the oppressive and frustration of the past 3 years. Once, I clung to a marriage that existed in name only, deliberately maintained the facade of a wealthy wife, curbed my edge, and kept a low profile for the illusion of stability. Now I fully understand that true dignity never comes from a title granted by others, but from the absolute confidence of wielding capital and steering your own life. Some are trapped by love, obsessed with illusions, greedy for shortcuts, and eventually devoured by desire, destroying their own lives with their own hands. Others remain clear-headed and independent, decisive and strategic, always in control of their own life's board game. I never actively do evil, but I never tolerate any offense or betrayal. Respect me an inch, and I'll offer 3 parts of decency. Harm me a hair, and I'll root out the weeds and settle every score. As night deepens, stars begin to twinkle one by one. The past betrayals, humiliations, endurance, and entanglements all have turned the page to zero. The road ahead is wide and open, without burdens, without ties, without weaknesses, alone at the peak of life, holding prosperity and the future in my hands, clear-eyed and independent, serene and unrestrained. From now on I live only for myself, thriving with every passing year, every step a path of blooming flowers.